Good morning, everyone. Let's get started. I'm Janet Ivey, Chair of the Latornell Steering Committee and Chief Specialist of Watershed Plans and Source Water Protection at Credit Valley Conservation. On behalf of the committee, Conservation Ontario, and the University of Guelph, I'd like to welcome you all to the Latornell Leadership Project. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Guelph, where I'm located, is situated on treaty land and is steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Today, I acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations of the Anishinaabe peoples, from whose traditional territory I'm speaking to you. I would also like to acknowledge that you're joining us today from many places, near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. I'd like to take a moment to introduce Katrina Furlanetto, General Manager at Cataraqui Conservation, based in Kingston, Ontario. Katrina has a background in aquatic biology and has had the opportunity to work with several field teams across Ontario to better understand the impact of urban development on natural systems. She's been with Cataraqui Conservation for almost 5 years, working primarily in the Department of Watershed Planning and Engineering, and recently accepted the General Manager's position in January of 2020. Katrina will be moderating today's webinar, so take it away, Katrina.
Great, thanks, Jen, and welcome everyone. So this is our 5th webinar in the Latornell Leadership Project series, and I'm excited to be here with you today to discuss the important topic of what makes a good leader in the conservation sector. The term leader can take many forms, often referring to the art of motivating a group of people towards achieving a common vision. And in my own experience, doing so while asking many questions. Don't be afraid of what you don't know, and being brave, willing to frequently step out of your comfort zone. Everyone in any industry, at any stage of their career or educational journey, can be a leader. Events of the past year have challenged professionals around the world to evaluate what really makes a good leader, especially during a time of crisis or of unprecedented change. Themes of leading with empathy and kindness, the importance of listening and recognition, and the strength of mentorship have many adjusting their leadership styles to better support one another and navigate uncertainty together. So what makes a good leader in the conservation industry? We could rhyme off a long list of qualities, but today we've invited 4 environmental leaders, all in different career stages, from the Conservation Authority, municipal, nonprofit, and private sectors, to provide their perspective on leadership and share some insight into a few key soft skills that have helped them be successful professionally. I want to thank each of our speakers for taking the time to be with us today and sharing a part of their leadership journey with us. So this morning's webinar will be split into 2 parts. We'll start with each of our 4 speakers giving out a brief presentation to highlight the 1 or 2 leadership qualities that have helped them in their conservation career. Following the presentations, we will invite all speakers to engage in a panel discussion where I will ask a few curated questions as well as some from the participants from the Q&A box. So before we get going, a few housekeeping notes. So all of our attendees or participants today are muted and you will not be able to speak or come on video. You will find a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And at any time during the webinar, I encourage you to type any questions that you may have in the box and press enter to have it posted. You may direct questions to individual presenters or to the panel as a whole. And there's an option to press the thumbs up to upvote a question, and we will be using that to help determine which questions to ask our panelists. Feel free to interact with each other in the chat box as we go through the webinar. And to our panelists, a reminder to you to use your mute button when you are not speaking, and of course to unmute yourself when you are. This webinar is being recorded so that others who are not able to attend will be able to listen in when they can. So before I introduce our panelists, let's take a quick look at the results of our poll. So we've got quite a spread of today, many coming from Southwestern Ontario and a few other representatives from across the province. And there seems to be quite a good split between those in leadership positions and those in not. So looking forward to providing some inspiration and some advice to you as you navigate your careers. Okay, so with that, I will introduce our first speaker, Gail Wood, who's representing the Conservation Authority sector. Gail is the retired Chief Administrative Officer of the Lake Simcoe region, Nottawasaga Valley, Niagara Peninsula, and Ganaraska Region Conservation Authorities. She has worked internationally with China and Australia, focusing on integrated watershed management. Gail has a Bachelor of Environmental Studies degree from the University of Waterloo and certificates in strategic management from York University, Schulich School of Business and Alternative Dispute Resolution, University of Windsor Faculty of Law. Gail currently serves as the Canadian co-chair of the International Joint Commission's Great Lakes Water Quality Board and is the chair of the Ontario Land Trust Alliance, in addition to serving on the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Foundation. Welcome, Gail, and I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, good morning, Katrina, and good morning to all of the 270 participants on the call today. I do want to thank the Latornell conference folks for inviting me to join this really important webinar on leadership, and recognizing that there's a few of us gray-haired folks out there that are still pecking away at leadership, even though that we've retired. So what I wanted to focus on today was an area that I really, for some reason, was attracted to in my career. And that's focusing on organizations that were really in a state of extreme challenge or even a crisis situation. Before I move through this, however, I just wanted to indicate at the bottom of this slide, you'll see something called leadershipfirst.net. And I'm going to refer to that at the end of the presentation today. So next slide. When I was dealing with Lake Simcoe, Nottawasaga, and Niagara, in terms of the challenges, Lake Simcoe, when I arrived there 3 months later, the Premier of Ontario cut all of the capital funding. So these things have been going on for quite a while. Nottawasaga, I followed a leader that had been leaving the organization, and it really needed to be updated and restructured. And in Niagara, of course, we've had an Auditor General's report that really drew a lot of attention to the Niagara Authority. So when I arrived there, it wasn't just about the leadership skills that we all had to do. It was about what did we have to do. And in order to have this conversation today, I talked to 15 people from those 3 organizations that I had the pleasure and the privilege to work with over the past number of years. And they said in terms of what required doing was the development of a shared vision. And that wasn't just a vision, but it was the values, the goals, the objectives, and the timeframes on how we were going to move out of the crisis situation into something more stable. The importance they talked about of communication, but in particular, listening. And I'm going to talk about that over and over again. Listening to the team as a leader is one of the most important skill sets we can all have. Enabling and empowering your team to act, but also while they're acting, you as the leader has to walk the talk. That is extremely important. And something we forget along the way is to celebrate our successes, because the journey of moving through any challenging time is a series of phases, if you will. And it's important we take time throughout those phases to celebrate our success and acknowledge one another. So the next slide talks about this site that I've referenced, which is leadershipfirst.net. Nothing more inspiring than looking at a good quote on leadership every day of your life. This one from, of course, one of the most inspired female leaders of the past century, Eleanor Roosevelt. She talks about a good leader inspiring people to have confidence in the leader, but a great leader inspires people to have confidence in themselves. Next slide. So now about the how. My former team and colleague members shared with me the importance of what we did, but it's the how, it's the values, it's the leadership skills that we're talking about today. And when I developed this chart, I came up with the values that I thought were really important on the left-hand side of the chart, which are honesty, passion, transparency, accountable, listening, delegating, being empathetic, and being confident, but also doing that with humility. But when I spoke to the 15 people to get their thoughts on what they think is the most important characteristics, this is what they came up with. Walking the talk. The leaders got to walk the talk. And if you don't, you're going to lose your team. You're going to lose your inspiration. As a leader, you need to set very clear and realistic, and they emphasize this, realistic expectations. We're all feeling very challenged today. What can we realistically be expected to do? We're not just leaders, we're mentors. We can be mentors both professionally, and we can be mentors personally. We need to be authentic. And one of the most important things they emphasized is leaders need to be able to admit that we're human. We make mistakes. And when we make mistakes, accept responsibility, learn from that lesson, and then move on. Respect is extremely important. And I bet if I asked all 270 of you to define respect, you might come up with different definitions. Your organization needs, if you identify values of leadership, you need to define those. What does respect mean in your organization? Be open, be flexible, weigh opinions of others before making your decision, and keep your team up to date on changes, particularly in the conservation movement right now with all of the puzzle pieces moving. The team wants to know what's going on. Be collaborative, support your team, and sometimes when they're struggling, actually come in and help them with their work and give them credit for that. Understand the position they're in, acknowledge that everybody has different work styles, and give the team credit for what their achievements are. A good leader accepts the responsibility for mistakes, but gives the team the credit for all the successes, and trust your team members. So to conclude today, I want to end with yet another inspirational slide. Here's somebody that is, I mean, he's going to the moon. So what an inspiration is that? The two key characteristics I wanted to talk about leadership today: walking the talk. If you don't walk the talk, you're going to lose your people, you're going to lose your vision, you're going to lose your passion to getting towards where you're going. And listening. Richard Branscombe says all good leaders listen to their people, empower them to go away and turn their innovative ideas into a reality. Listening means you're not on the phone watching your next appointment or reading your emails. You are truly listening and giving feedback to your team. So Katrina, and to everybody today, as I said, there is life after retirement, and I'm having the privilege right now of working on several boards where I can contribute in a leadership role. The pay's not that great, but the mission and the people I work with are fantastic. So thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you, Gail. Lots of words of wisdom, and for your leadership over the last several years. I have lots to take away from that, and I hope that everyone else did as well. On to our next presenter, who is Kevin Butt. Kevin has 21 years of experience working in the environmental industry, preparing natural heritage and tree studies throughout Southern Ontario, and including almost 7 years at RJ Burnside and Associates Limited. Kevin has liaised with government and review agencies, property owners and their agents, and the general public through the approval stages, including project initiation and scope determination, public information centers, submission of materials, implementation assistance, construction supervision, and monitoring. He is based out of the Guelph office, where he manages 12 staff as the leader of environmental planning and assessment team. Turning it over to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Katrina. Katrina, you can see my video okay?
I can. It is flashing back and forth.
Yeah, I'm seeing that it's flashing too. Maybe I'll pause share. Sorry, everybody, and I'm going to try resuming share, see if that fixes. That's doing that. Marielle, maybe I'll ask that you jump in.
We'll just give it a minute or two here for some troubleshooting. Perfect.
There we go. Thanks, Mario. So apparently every good slideshow is supposed to end with a sunset. I figured I'd start a leadership seminar showing me wearing a white hat, which I guess shows I'm in charge. So I'm Kevin Butt. I'm with RJ Burnside and Associates Limited in Guelph. Thanks, Katrina. I'm representing the private sector of the conservation community. Next, Mario. A little bit of history about myself. I'm definitely dating myself. 94 to 98, I was at the environmental science program at University of Guelph, and then the ecosystem restoration program in 1999 at Niagara College. Next, please. And then, so I started my career as the first employee of Abboud & Associates in Guelph, Ontario as a junior technologist, a bit ambiguous of a term, but transitioned to becoming an arborist ecologist back in 2014 after being 14 years with that company and building it up to 8 people. I went on to work for RJ Burnside, who is a company with about 350 staff. And then now my role is officially the leader of the environmental planning and assessment team. Next, please, Mario. And of course, I've got to be the corporate shill here. So we're an engineering company of 11 offices across Canada with about 350 staff, a number of clients through public, private, Aboriginal, and international. And we cover a number of sectors there, and check out our website. Thanks, Mario, please. So as current role of the leader of planning environmental assessment, I have 11 staff. I'm looking to hire 2 more soon, so watch at LinkedIn for there's one there already and one coming, as well as 2 other staff. So just setting the stage for where I am with the leadership in the private sector. I'm responsible for staff workflow, the salaries and raises. We just went through our review period. Business development, bringing in more staff, bringing more work, for staff, and overall happiness of my staff and colleagues and the company. Next, Mario. So we were asked to pick our soft skill that we figure is our strength, and empathy and sympathy is probably, hopefully, I'm interpreting as my successful soft skill, and as part of that, I'm looking to reduce stress of staff, and the first thing to consider with stress is where is that stemming from? And I think in the private sector, unlike some other sectors, utilization is incredibly stressful. The idea that there's a percentage of your day that should be spent on project time, not on other things. And junior people, for the most part, come in at 90 to 95%. So that can be very stressful in terms of keeping busy, looking busy, and making sure that you're benefiting the company. There are always the personality conflicts and age and gender biases that need to be considered and worked through. There's the myth of the slow period for ecologists. Maybe we only work when being outside. But the workflow continues, and in recent years it's been busy to crazy busy. There's obviously part and parcel with that, this dogpiling of commitments and deliverables for clients. Then there's this crisis of faith that happens periodically where you're positioned with the private sector, whether you're surrounded by engineers, which are not necessarily of the same mindset as ecologists. Otherwise, there's many of our clients are developers, which doesn't sit well sometimes with certain staff if there are expectations or ideals that they had for their career. And then, of course, COVID was significantly stressful for and continues to be for a number of people. So just a recognition that the stress management and stressors vary per person and will vary over time. Next, Mario. So in terms of what I've been doing to make sure that people are feeling supported, rewarded, is checking in on people. Some are benefiting from every other week to have scheduled meetings. I mean, some of my staff are leaders, and it's lonely to be at the top. So it's nice to be checking in with somebody and bounce ideas. And for the most part, it's just letting somebody listen to you. Spontaneous component is just making sure that you know, making that compassionate call every once in a while if you haven't heard from somebody for a while. Very early on in the process too, this turning on of cameras comment, I was doing that in March. I don't require that of others, but it brings a personal side to things rather than just seeing the stock photo, and knowing that you're engaged and you're looking eye to eye or camera to camera at least. The other thing that I guess manifests that sympathy that I'm looking to convey to people, the words that and vernacular that I'm using on a daily basis is, you know, like when I do that check-in with people, it's like let's not talk about projects for a little bit. Let's see how you're sincerely doing. Again, there's this concern about utilization and making sure you're busy during the day. So I'll say, you know what, no problem. Send me what you're working on. I'll look at it tonight, and then it'll be ready for you tomorrow morning so that you can hit the ground running. The concern with young folks or inexperienced folks not being able to dig into that project entirely. Let's crush through this thing together. And then ask me 100 times, that's cool. And then otherwise there's, and this is the big part about being a leader, is being able to transition that leadership over in greater amounts every time. And how about you take a try at this, and I can be involved as much as you like. And the idea is that tapers off over time and allows you to go on leading in other sectors. So I think I'm going to finish up there. Katrina, if you want to take over now.
Great. Thank you very much, Kevin. Stress is challenging to manage at any given time. So great advice on bringing that communication and being empathetic to our teams and working together to overcome that. So as a reminder to all participants, if you have a question for our presenters, please enter it into the Q&A box accessible at the bottom panel of your screen. If a question that someone has already posted resonates with you, hit the thumbs up button to identify that, and we will consider it for the panel coming up in today's webinar. So our next speaker is Melissa Ryan. Melissa Ryan is an environmental engineer with nearly 20 years of experience in the public and private sector. She has worked at the City of Kitchener for the last 10 years and was initially a project manager in the sanitary and stormwater utilities, working on stormwater management projects and creek restoration work. She is now a manager, service coordination and improvement, and does process improvement initiatives, strategic planning, and special projects for the Infrastructure Services Department. She loves to collaborate with others, be innovative in her approaches to problems, and leverages her executive coaching training to help others achieve their best. Thank you for joining us today, Melissa, and on to you.
Hi, everyone. I'll give you a little bit more of an introduction about me in terms of my career path. And I will say I don't have a slideshow, so it's just me. Well, I do have some cue cards, so get excited. So I graduated from a Bachelor's of Environmental Engineering at the University of Guelph, and I won't say what year. And then I followed it up with a master's. I really felt like after I was finished my bachelor's, I thought, I don't know anything. I can't go to work yet. So I did a master's, and I did a project that was really innovative, really difficult. And it inspired me to keep that innovation, to keep trying new things. And you'll see that that is one of the themes in my presentation today. So then once I was done my master's, I went on to get an engineering consulting job And Kevin, I really connected with what you said in terms of sometimes people sort of feel a little bit like a crisis of identity. I think I hit that crisis early on and I thought, no, I don't think engineering is for me. So I almost gave up engineering. And then I spoke with someone who was much wiser than me, and they said, why don't you just try a different job or a different angle? So I thought, okay, maybe that will be easier than going back to school or reinventing myself. So I was fortunate enough to get a job at Conservation Halton. Hello to all the Conservation Halton people. And loved it there. It was all about collaboration, and there was such high purpose in the work that I was doing. But you'll see a theme here in terms of just, I'm always looking for sort of like growth and more experiences. And so I left after several years and I went to consulting again to get sort of a broader experience of type of work. And then after that, I went to the city of Kitchener in the project management role, and I worked on some really neat stormwater related projects. I did Victoria Park Lake rehabilitation, which was a huge undertaking, $11 million, cleaning up the crown jewel of the city of Kitchener. It's not a lake, it's a pond, but we call it a lake. And downtown, with everyone sort of like sending me emails saying, you better not screw this up. And it was huge, and it was such a great experience. I mean, it was very time intensive, but I learned so much. And then I continued to do those types of projects. And then I had an opportunity to move into the current role I'm in now, which is Manager of Service Coordination and Improvement, a mouthful. But basically what I do is I work at a department level, corporate projects, initiatives, process improvement, strategic planning, business planning. It's just much bigger picture type thinking, which I really enjoy. So that's a little story of me. And today I want to talk to you about 3 qualities that I really appreciate in leaders and that I hope I emulate myself. So this is enter in cue cards, very high tech. So the first one is growth mindset. I hope everyone can read this. So this comes from a book from Carol Dweck called Mindset. She's done research for over 30 years into sort of like the way people think. And there's 2 types of mindsets. There's fixed. And so an example of that would be, I'm not good at sports. I'm only as smart as where I'm at right now. Versus a growth mindset, which is what I'm promoting here, which says, I'm working on my hand-eye coordination. I haven't tried this, but I'm going to give it my best and I'll keep learning. So a growth mindset for me as a leader means that you don't know everything. You're trying new things. You're looking to learn. You're listening to feedback. You're getting input from people, and you're giving yourself and others permission to keep growing and keep learning. So that's been really important for me and probably is a reflection of my career journey. So in terms of examples, so I'd love to, for each skill that I tell you, I'd love to give you a good example and a bad example. So a good example of this, we're all living through a pandemic. So who are the leaders that you see or people that are trying new things? They're saying, okay, you want me to do a presentation in front of 200 people that I will never see? Okay, let's give it a shot. Or it says, we're now doing virtual meetings. I have to do facilitation using virtual methods rather than sticky notes. Let's give it a try. So it's that kind of mindset that I think is really great and admirable in a leader. A bad example of that would be someone who's stuck in their own old ways, who says, no, I need that piece of paper to be signed by 5 people physically. We can't move to a system of electronic signatures, that kind of thing. So that's sort of a bad example of, what you're telling people is you don't think you should try something. And if you do try, you have to be perfect at it. So that's growth mindset. So the next one is a little bit fuzzier to define, but this one's really important. And I actually think, Kevin, in your presentation, you were talking about this, wholeheartedness. So I'm curious if anyone on the call today has ever heard of Brene Brown and is a big fan. I know I am. Her book, Daring Greatly, is one of my favorite, and it really explains this wholeheartedness. So she's got a great definition. I'm not putting it on the screen today, but basically for me, what it means is you're showing up as your authentic self. That means you're vulnerable, you're taking risks, but at the end of the day, you know you are enough. And, you know, as she loves to say, you're in the arena, you're doing the hard work. And so as a leader, showing up with wholeheartedness is so unbelievably powerful. And, you know, to some of the other presenters' point, it means you're giving permission to others to be wholehearted as well. So a good example of this recently, our CAO at the City of Kitchener, who is someone I really admire and respect. He's incredibly brilliant. And sometimes I feel like he operates on a whole other level than the rest of us mere mortals. And so we had a virtual town hall meeting. And at this point, this was in January, those of us parents with children had been in the same household, looking after remote schooling and our own work for several weeks. And so he came on and he said, oh, he'd been in meetings all week and his children kept interrupting. He said at one point the smoke alarm went off because one of his children was trying to bake cookies. Another one came in with a cat and said, I think the cat's unwell. And he sounded so exasperated when he said it. And I just thought, oh my goodness, I feel that way too. I am exasperated as well. And so it was so amazing. And I respected and admired him even more for sharing that story with us, for, you know, thinking the CAO is struggling right now. That is so relatable. So that is what I mean by wholeheartedness, showing up as your whole self. So a bad example for me would be, I can think of two. So one of them would be too much vulnerability. So that's the TMI, too much information, where you're telling everyone everything. I think there's a time and place for that. So that's not wholeheartedness to me. And another one is sort of the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I don't know if you've ever experienced this. Someone is one way to you, but completely different to someone else. Maybe their boss or their boss's boss. Not wholeheartedness. So the takeaway here is, you know, try your very best to be wholehearted and recognize it in others. It's that connection piece. And I really think what Kevin was saying earlier about, you know, empathy and sympathy, that's part of that wholeheartedness. So the third one is core values and purpose or vision. As a leader, to have these is so incredibly powerful. And this is something everyone can do. Spend some time figuring out what your core values are. You know, what is really important to you? How do you want to show up? What is sort of a non-negotiable? And your purpose and your vision is about, you know, what's your purpose overall? Are you in alignment with what you're bringing in terms of everyone has something unique to contribute, and hopefully you're in alignment with what you're doing in terms of that purpose. So the core values piece, to me, you know, you should only have like a handful that are really, if you have too many, it's going to be hard to keep track of. So have a few, and they are your guiding posts or your lighthouse. And it's easy to do core values when everything is going great. Oh, I can be respectful. That's a high, everything's great. I'm getting along with everyone. Everything's fine. This comes into play when it is tough, when you're being pushed, when it is uncertain. And I look back to my core values and I say, when I don't feel right, you know, when you're in a situation, you say, something's not right here. Check in with your core values and purpose and say, am I about to do something that is in alignment with that? And I will tell you, when it is tough, it is hard. It is hard work. And so I'm going to give you an example that I hope you feel is a good example of this. So one of my core values is integrity. And I know that word means different things to different people, and mine is a little bit all-encompassing too. But for me, what it means is I'm doing what I said I would do. You can count on me. I have some follow through, and I'm being transparent. So I was working with a team through some change management, and it was pretty tough because it involves sort of saying, we're not doing what our customers are wanting us to do. We're falling down, you know, let's reflect on where there's pain points. Let's kind of put that together. So we're working through the team with sort of their failings, right? And the idea was that that list was going to be shared with a greater stakeholder group, which is a really vulnerable place for people to be, to say, I admit that I'm not doing this well, or this, I need to work on this. And so we'd work through that. And then it was going to a steering committee. And the steering committee at the 11th hour said, we want to add in this new thing. Didn't feel right. I could sense it inside. And I said, that's not what we told the team. They've seen the list here. And I said, you can't go and send that to the stakeholder group without vetting it through the team. And I know it caused some ruffles. And I was, standing true. And I said, I don't feel right about this. I don't have any authority over what you do next, but it's not right. And so what ended up happening was that they did listen, and they talked to the team and said, well, we have this additional one that we'd like you to work through, and then we want to send it to the stakeholders. And that felt really in alignment with my core values. So that's what I mean by it's a lighthouse. When it's murky and it's foggy and you're like, I'm not sure, if you are strong in your core values and your purpose, then you will make the right choice for you, but it might be hard. So that's a good example. A bad example, I hope, a bad example might be someone who says that respect is really important to them, but the way that they treat people, you don't notice the respect, or they treat some people with respect and others without. And so to me, that's not a core value if you're not consistent. And I would say, in terms of core values, people don't have to tell you, you should be able to observe their actions and their behaviors and be able to deduce what their core values are. So that's my thought of core values. In terms of resources, so I just really think that this is something anyone could spend some time on to develop, to really get clarity on. And there's all kinds of resources on the web. There isn't a particular book that I would recommend. I don't know if you've noticed that I love to read or recommend books, but there's tons of resources on the web. This is something that you can probably find tools, work with friends if you need to. I know I did this work with a coach, myself being a coach as well. This is something great. It will be your roadmap. This is worth spending time on. So I feel like these three qualities, growth, mindset, wholeheartedness, and core values and purpose, if a leader has all three of those, they're going to do a great job, because the growth mindset says, I don't know something yet, I'm willing to learn and teach others and all learn together. The wholeheartedness says, I'm honest. Maybe I don't got this, or I made a mistake. That's that wholeheartedness piece. And then the core value says, here's where we're going. Here's my vision. Here's how I'm going to do it. Are you on board? So hopefully that gives you a little bit more insight into what I think is a great leader. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Melissa. And I think we're starting to see some themes across the different presenters talking about, it's okay to make mistakes and to be your authentic self as a leader, and to, work with your teams, communicate how to achieve that overall purpose and vision together. So excellent examples on that talk. Okay, so moving to our final speaker, I'd like to introduce Joyce Chao. Joyce is a senior leader who has been working in the nonprofit environmental sector for the past 15 years. Joyce was the executive director of EcoSpark, an Ontario-based environmental charity, for 8 years. In 2020, she joined Evergreen as a senior program manager, leading city building projects across Canada. Joyce's expertise lies in leading multi-stakeholder collaboratives, community-based monitoring, policy and governance, education, and fundraising. She has been active in numerous environmental committees, including the Ontario Greenbelt Alliance, Biodiversity Education and Awareness Network, and the Southern Ontario Stream Monitoring and Research Team. Joyce currently sits on the board of the Small Change Fund, a national charity focused on helping communities raise funds for environmental solutions, community engagement, and Indigenous reconciliation. Welcome, Joyce, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Katrina. I've really enjoyed listening to my fellow panelists, and I am in total agreement with some of your comments about what makes a good conservation leader. As Katrina mentioned, my name is Joyce Chao. I'm a senior manager at Evergreen, and it's time now for me to do a shameless plug for Evergreen. Evergreen is a national not-for-profit who transforms spaces into great places so communities can thrive. Evergreen believes that by connecting people with natural and built worlds, we can enable Canadians to do great things that will shape our cities for the better. At Evergreen, I'm managing a portfolio of really exciting projects at the national scale. One of them includes a program called the Future City Builders Program. This one, although I just joined Evergreen last October, is very near and dear to my heart because it's a professional development program for youth ages 18 to 29, where through a virtual design thinking process, we give 25 to 30 youth the skills, the experience, and the networks to be able to become future city builders. I also work on Future Cities Canada, which currently is focused on convening cross-sectoral stakeholders, including governments, not-for-profits, academics, the philanthropic sector, and the private sector to advance a dialogue and a national strategy around the civic commons. And the civic commons being a network of public places and facilities where people can connect. So as Katrina mentioned, prior to that, I worked at EcoSpark for 15 years. As some of you may know, EcoSpark is a small ENGO focused on empowering communities to play an active role in protecting and sustaining nature. The heart and soul of that organization is outdoor environmental education as well as citizen science. So when I started at EcoSpark, I was fresh out of university. I had applied for any jobs that I could think of that had any relation to what I studied, which was biology. And so I eventually got an internship at EcoSpark. And at that time, I really didn't know what ENGOs did. I never heard of citizen science. So this really was my journey into this whole conservation sector, specifically the not-for-profit sector. And so slowly but surely, I stayed with the organization. I continued to grow and learn. I moved through the ranks. I basically held every title there was at the organization and was involved with nearly every program that EcoSpark had. And then eventually I became the executive director and held that role for almost 8 years. During that time, my proudest achievements with EcoSpark was the further development and expansion of our flagship program, Changing Currents, which is a citizen science program with youth, elementary and high school students to monitor their local streams. I'm proud of the development of the Greenbelt Youth Ambassadors Program. This is really recognizing that if decisions are going to be made on this landscape, that youth definitely need to be involved in understanding the process and how it could affect them, because these decisions are on a very long time frame of about 25 years. And I was also really proud of being part of the Growing the Greenbelt campaign with a large group of other ENGOs. And I'm really happy to see the recent announcement from the province that they're seeking feedback on how to grow the Greenbelt. So in terms of top qualities that have served me well in my career that I'd like to share with you, those include being a good relationship builder and being a problem solver. And so working at a small NGO at the time, these skills are particularly useful to help transform the organization at the time, going from survival mode to thriving mode. So in terms of being a relationship builder, I think that's important right now more than ever, especially given that we're in a pandemic. When I talk about building relationships, I mean building relationships with new individuals and strengthening your existing relationships with your colleagues. And I think if you're early on in your career, this is a very good tactic to employ because early in your career, you really do need to build this social capital that you can benefit from later on in your career. And personally, I do take pride in being able to work with literally anyone. And I see it as a personal challenge when there's someone who's called difficult to work with. I think to myself, I will be able to work with them because it's about knowing people and knowing where they're coming from and why they might be making certain decisions and what their perspective is. I also want to mention during the pandemic as well, with my new role at Evergreen, I've actually, I've turned to being much more sillier than I have been in the past. And this is very intentional because not only do I need some levity myself during this stressful time where I'm meeting colleagues virtually, but I think it also helps to bring teams together when we can laugh together during meetings. So an example of what I've been doing at meetings is We have a check-in where people say how they're feeling and where they're at in terms of capacity. But I'll also throw in a silly question like, what is your favorite childhood candy? And that really helps to not only get the temperature of how people are feeling work-wise, but it also brings lightness and smiles to the meeting. So if you want to share what your favorite childhood candy is in the chat, feel free to do so. Mine is Fun Dip. I still love it. So in terms of relationship building with other organizations, that's really important, especially from the not-for-profit sector, because resources are always, you always need more resources. And by working with other organizations, you can really leverage other skill sets, other knowledge bases so that you can achieve a common goal together and have better impact. So you can divide and conquer. I was also very fortunate to be working at EcoSpark because it was a place that promoted professional development and allowed someone that was junior to attend meetings, go to conferences, and this really served to help me build my professional relationships that are relationships that I still can value today. And also working at a small not-for-profit, everything that we did was collaborative, and that to me set a baseline of how to work in general, that it's always better to work in teams. It's always better to leverage other skill sets and bring more people to the table. Another really important skill set that I like to share is to be a problem solver. And so when I started my role as the executive director at EcoSpark, it was a time when the organization was ending a very large contract with the City of Toronto. So the year prior, the organization was a $1 million organization. It had 15 to 20 staff working with it. And that because the contract had ended abruptly with the change in mayoralship at the City of Toronto, it sort of had to immediately shrink to about $200,000 budget with 2.5 staff. So when I took on the role as executive director, my job was basically to make sure that the organization didn't tank. So it was very stressful at the time. But I think in terms of problem solving, it's about working with the board of directors, having a plan on how to crawl out of this deficit and how to build back better. So I think problem solving is always a valued skill in any individual, whether you're in a leadership position or not. And the problem solving is something that you know, you need it time and time again. For being a small ENGO at EcoSpark, another issue that we ran into in terms of being able to solve a problem was that because we were in a tight financial situation at the time, we had a rent contract that was a 3-month basis contract, because that gave us the flexibility financially. And then I remember, you know, into the new year, I met with the property manager, and they said basically that you have 3 months to leave your office. Another tenant wants to expand into the space, and they're paying more rent. And in fact, because you were a not-for-profit, we didn't increase your rent over the past couple of years. So you have 3 months to go. And by the way, all the rental costs have increased during this time, so you probably are priced out of this neighborhood as well. So goodbye and good luck. So when that happened, I think you know, you go into instant problem solving mode, and that was maybe like a week of 2 of all hands on deck. And at that time, all hands on deck meant 2.5 staff, trying to problem solve, trying to figure out where can we move, what makes sense for the staffing, can staff get to work if we move further away. And then again, we were extremely fortunate to find a space at the Woodwood Barns, and it's a location that actually gives subsidized rents for not-for-profits. There was only 1 space left. That space happened to fit our needs, and we were able to take advantage of that. And in the end, the rent in the new space was cheaper than the rent that we were paying at the other place in Liberty Village. And so what I will add to the whole problem solving is that it's great to be a problem solver, but in my experience, if you solve problems sometimes too quickly, you're not able to share with others the breadth of what the problem was. And what I mean by that is with the problem with finding a new location for the organization, that problem was resolved so quickly that I don't feel like the board fully appreciated the whole gravity of the situation, because they heard about it and then it was fixed right away. And I liken this to the example of like, no one knows that you clean the dishes in the dishwasher unless someone sees you push the button. So that's something that I would add to the whole problem solving, is that you need to give space for yourself when you solve problems to let people know the gravity of the situation and that it was solved. So yeah, problem solving and relationship building are two things that I think are really important to be a great conservation leader. And those are things that are valued traits that have helped me secure a role at Evergreen. And those are things, skills that I like to help support in the people that I manage today. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Joyce. Lots of good tips on relationship building and problem solving and how to use those to move forward as a leader. Okay, so that concludes the first part of our webinar. Thank you so much for all the inspiration and perspectives from our speakers. So at this time, I'm actually going to ask all of our speaker panelists to turn on their cameras and we will enter into a panel discussion. So if you can stay muted until I refer to you, that would be great. And then please remember to unmute yourself before you speak. All right, so we'll start with one of the questions that the committee had for all of our leaders. There are two common models of leadership: leading the charge at the front of the pack, sharing risks and rewards, or leading from behind as a servant leader. If all the panelists could share your thoughts on when and each approach could be needed or successful, that would be great. And we will start with Kevin.
Well, managing staff's very analogous to being a parent, and I've heard the term giving children roots and wings is important, and staff underneath you or direct reports are needing those roots and wings. So it's going to change based on how self-propelled certain staff may be for taking on certain tasks, where their headspace is at. Maybe they're stressed and they're needing to take some time to themselves. But I think knowing and reading the field as a leader, knowing when you can start drawing back. So definitely early in the career is often where those roots are needed. And then the wings sort of take off as the person becomes more self-propelled. But it's definitely a spectrum as opposed to a binary thing.
For sure, and I can understand how that can change as your career grows and how you work with your teams. Gail, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Did you ask me, Katrina?
I did. Go for it.
Oh, sorry, everybody. I lost the connection there for a minute. I do have a couple of thoughts on that question. I think your leadership style can change depending on the evolution of the organization. So when an organization is in crisis, if you will, or under extreme challenge, I think individuals really want to see the leader leading the charge and have confidence in the leader that they're going to be moving the organization with their assistance in the right direction. And then as the organization evolves, if you will, the leadership style should shift and move more to leading from behind. And I would just finish by saying, I mean, I had the privilege of working at Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority for 20 years and constantly had to shift the leadership style because the authority was moved from an organization in crisis to a really sophisticated organization today with extremely competent people who were very capable of leading on their own.
That's a great perspective. Thanks, Gail. Melissa, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Kevin and Gail said, which, you know, for me, what that means, it's a dial. And so you dial it up, dial it down. You sort of have to sort of gauge it based on what's happening. So further to what Gail said, in a crisis, it's no time to be like, oh, I'll just put everyone in front of me. You guys go, you know, you got to be stepping up, sharing the vision, where are we headed? What do we need to do? But really, as part of it too, then you dial it down in terms of like, what can I do to remove obstacles, get out of your way, and empower you to also step up? Because like leadership to me isn't about a title anymore. When I was younger, I thought, oh, I will only be a leader when I have a title. And, you know, that's not what it is. It's, you can show up as a leader every day, no matter what your position. But if you are in an actual titled leadership role, then you might need to step it up. But I love it when you can do both, because it's further to what Gail said. You accept responsibility as a leader, but you give credit to others when, you know, the rewards are finally there. So it's sort of finding that balance. And I actually wanted to add one more thing, if I may. A term that I wasn't familiar with, but I discovered about a year and a bit ago, which is followership. So I'm really curious if anyone else have heard of this concept. And it sort of says, okay, leadership, we talk about leadership all the time, leadership, 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 but followership is important. You can't be a leader if no one's following you. And if you're a leader, you're probably following someone else. You've got a board of directors, you've got a boss. So leadership is about a balance of being a leader, but also being a follower. And, you know, you need to work on followership as well. So anyhow, there's a little bit of literature out there about it, but I think that's where we need to spend some time, because most of the time we're probably following someone rather than leading all the time.
That's a great perspective. Thanks, Melissa. Joyce, do you have any other thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, I would say that in a time of when your organization is not in crisis or not in a pandemic, I think that leading from behind is sort of my personal preference, because I feel like that's the way where your staff can learn the fastest and where they can make small mistakes and learn. So I think that's really my preference in leadership. But I do feel like times like the pandemic, leading the charge is really important now. I think leaders of organizations or people in leadership positions really need to make sure that their staff feel like they're taken care of, that they have empathy, and that they understand that now it's challenging times for everyone, and that that there's some flexibility with that.
Great. And so as we can see and hear from our speakers, you know, being a leader is often a challenging role. And so you always have to challenge yourself and learn to adapt, and don't be too hard on yourself based on your expectations. And I think that helps in order to move your leadership style from the different perspectives that we've been chatting about. So there's a good question here at the chat that I'll throw out to our panelists. So what are your top tips for inspiring and motivating team members to work together towards an organization's vision and purpose? And I'll start with Melissa this time.
Yeah, I talked about inspiring, so I figured I might need to go first. You know what? You need to understand the vision yourself and really connect with it, because it's about that wholeheartedness and authenticity. It's really hard to be like, we're leading the charge if you don't believe it yourself. So hopefully you get into a place where you're like, okay, I'm seeing it, I'm understanding it, now I can share. And, you know, take the time to know what's important with others. So everyone's in this sort of field for a different reason. And so what's their purpose? And can you connect the vision to what their purpose is and show them how it's connected? It takes more time, but honestly, if somebody then feels more connected to the work and to the vision, they're going to be more committed. And, you know, let them know that they can bring their own strengths to the table too, right? So taking the time to figure out, how do we do this so that we can all get there, but we're we're taking our own boats to get there, but in the same direction. So taking that time, I think, is really helpful, and it just makes people feel much more engaged than telling them, do these 3 steps. No, show them where we're going. How can they get there themselves as well?
Great. And sometimes it's hard to find the time, but for these types of conversations, it's really worthwhile to move through that with your team and be able to kind of see the next step. Sometimes, especially recently, that's been very hard to see. Gail, do you have a perspective?
I do. Thank you, Katrina. Sometimes I think the easy part is actually developing the strategic direction and the vision. I think the harder part is actually delivering on it, and inspiring and motivating people in terms of working together to get that delivery done is really essential. My tip would be, I mean, I'm such a big advocate of just asking people. It seems simple, but it is difficult to do, and I want to relate to what Melissa said. So if this is the strategy that you've developed and here's your vision, talk with the team about how do you deliver on your goals and objectives. What motivates you? Because different people are motivated by different things. It could be candy. Kevin doesn't like rockets. I do. I love rockets. I saw that in the chat. Ask your team, communicate with the team. How do they work together to aspire to meet the direction that they're going, but also what motivates them? And you're going to get answers from the team. They're always going to trust you, pardon me, you always need to trust the feedback that they're giving you. They'll give you the clues on how to motivate and inspire them. Your job is to trust them and help deliver on that.
Sure. And I like your point earlier about the strategic direction and how implementation can be challenging, because we've seen so many strategic goals that are very lofty, but unless you can make them realistic and get your team buy-in and figure out how can you work together to be motivated to get there, then you're not putting yourself up for success. So I think that's a really meaningful conversation to have with your team. Joyce, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, I would say 2 words, co-creation and collaboration. So if the example is a strategic plan, that development process should ideally include the staff team so that they're part of the dreaming and the visioning process of the plan, so that everyone's on the same page of where the organization wants to go in the future, so that you create that buy-in right from the beginning. It's not something that's coming down from an executive level. It's something that the organization and the team create together. So I think that sense of ownership is really important to be able to then implement the vision.
For sure. Kevin, do you have a perspective?
See, this is the joy of going at the end of these responses, because everybody's so much better spoken. So, but yeah, just underscoring the empowerment of all people, and making sure that opinions are valued. I mean, some pretty surprising things come out of people, positive things, when there's an open mic, essentially, and equal respect. So, I mean, we've been able to, I think of ways to innovate, not only through how you do business, but also how you communicate with clients, and then how you do your work, whether it be technology or presentation. And I really value those first looks at things that the junior folks might have at something, because they're not entrenched in some, what, we've been doing it this way all along. And at my age, you tend to know what works, and let's not break it, because it's working. So, but then it's nice to have those candid questions of, well, why do you do that?
For sure. And being able to answer why sometimes challenges our own thinking. So having that feedback loop in those conversations are very empowering. Okay, so moving on to another question. What was the most important step that you took to develop leadership qualities in the first 5 years of your career? And for this one, I'll ask Joyce to start off.
I think there were three key things that I did in the early years of my career. One was that I worked at a really small organization. And when you work at a small shop, you're able to do everything because everyone needs to do a bit of everything. So you learn how to do a bit of communications, you learn fundraising, you learn about all the programs, you learn about governance. So I think working at a small organization allows you to learn a lot and get a lot of responsibility quickly. The second thing for me was that I participated in the YCP program, the Young Conservation Professional Career Development Program in 2006. And that was the second year of the program, and it was a really great opportunity to be among peers in the sector and to learn from each other. And I think that program helped to foster connections that I still hold dear today. The third thing is that I was able to secure a series of mentors early on in my career that I've kept in touch with, and that they have been really helpful to provide advice when I've been in challenging times, and also to be references when I apply for jobs. So I think securing mentors for yourself and a diverse set of mentors, so people who have different leadership styles than you that you can learn from, is a really good thing to do early on.
I completely agree. And sometimes as a leader, you can feel swamped or you don't know how to move through a direction, and bouncing that off of a mentor can be a confidence boost, and it can also give you that guidance on where to go. And the best thing for me out of mentorship is that you don't only benefit from the mentor, but most of the time your mentor benefits from you too. So it's a really good relationship building opportunity. Kevin, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think there's the understanding that leadership can happen organically. You're not often just thrust into it, from going from no employees to having a number of reports. So like learning any new skill, that there is that research that's required, and there are great resources. I'm seeing some recommendations coming up in the chat. So what I was very fortunate that my company sponsored a leadership program that was a third-party course over a course of a year, and the expectation that everybody had going in, speaking to people from even outside of the company that were taking this, was like, you know what, I probably know what I'm doing here, and then the course would end or the class would end. You'd be like, you know what, 95% of that I kind of knew that already, but it's that 5%, or this organization called it the nuggets that you're taking away. So it may seem like you kind of know this stuff because you've been thrust into this leadership role organically. Take advantage of those resources that are out there, because it's like eating. Everyone knows how to eat. Does everybody know how to eat healthy? Maybe you've got to take some training on how to eat healthy, whether that's reading resources, taking courses. So I liken leadership to that.
For sure. And putting time into figuring out, how do I implement those what I'm reading and be successful is part of the journey as well. Melissa, any food for thought?
Yeah, a few. So, look for opportunities to be able to do leadership. So sometimes early on in your career, you won't have those opportunities put upon you. So you can look for them, like, how are you volunteering, outside of work? They don't have to just be in work. And so there's that opportunity. Look for different opportunities where you might be able to practice some leadership skills. Then look for opportunities to learn. Further to Kevin's point, like if there's training being offered to you, jump at it. Apply a beginner's mind. And I think, that's the difference. You're going to take something away if you're just sort of an open cup that's ready to be filled. So I definitely did that, in the first several years. Articles, books, podcasts now, whatever you need to. There are so many inspiring people. There's probably too much choice, in fact. But there's lots of ways that you can sort of develop those leadership skills by learning from others. And I totally agree with Joyce. Mentoring is so important, but I want to challenge each of you to rethink of mentoring. It does not have to be someone more seasoned than you, older. It could be a peer. You can learn from your peers. And I would also challenge you, as you get further into your career, look for mentors that are younger than you. Maybe they're learning new stuff in school that you haven't learned. They've got a different approach. So don't look at as mentoring as sort of like this beacon. I can only reach, the CAO is my mentor. Anyone can be a mentor if you feel like you can learn from them. Again, if you apply beginner's mind, you will be an empty cup that can be filled. So that's my thoughts.
That's great. I think back to the point on podcasts, there's 5-10 minute pieces that you can listen to, that you can learn from. You can have a conversation over lunch with somebody that you can fit into your day. Because I know part of the challenge right now is, with everything going on, how do I continue to grow as a leader without, carving out a huge chunk of my time? So with a lot of the resources that are out there, there is that opportunity. And Gail, do you have any thoughts?
Now I'm in the position of Kevin. I'm the last one, and I couldn't agree more with what the previous three have said, because they're the same as I was going to reiterate on. Continuous learning and lifelong learning, especially when you're new into the leadership role, but not just learning it, taking that information that you're learning and putting it into practice, and learning, getting your lessons learned, both painful and otherwise, are incredible opportunities in your first 5 years of leadership. But I did want to reiterate the importance of mentorship. I can tell you one of my first mentors is in the webinar today, Frank Shaw. Most people know him, and I can tell you that Frank continues to be an amazing advocate for conservation authorities while we went through this whole trauma of the last year. Frank has been a lifelong mentor, but I do want to reiterate, there's also a number of people on the webinar today that I've had the privilege to work alongside of, with, etc. over the years, and I have learned something from each and every one of the individuals that are on the webinar today, and many more. And the importance of mentoring, networking, sharing, I don't think can be underestimated in terms of building your skill sets.
Yes, definitely. And that's one of the key pieces that we at Latornell have tried to foster, is that networking piece and making those connections from across the province, across industries, across career levels. And we have a professional development group on LinkedIn. If you're not part of that group, I encourage you to go and try and have these conversations, because in a virtual environment, it can often be tricky to keep that relationship building, growing. Okay, so one of the questions that we have on the chat that seems to be getting popular is, do you have any suggestions on team building in times where we are so segregated? So along those same lines, what do you do when you see the team breaking apart, when you can't pull them together physically? So I'll start with Gail this time.
Yeah, I presume as well, we're talking about the fact that, we're all in COVID right now, and it's not easy to have face-to-face conversations, and they're, from my perspective, they're preferred. I don't think you get as much, certainly interpretation of body language and honesty and openness sometimes, unless it's face-to-face. So tips on team building virtually, well, it has to be done. And depending on the size of the organization, you can start with your different groups, working together in terms of seeking advice on what's happening, what's breaking down, what needs reconstructing. And then you do that with all the individual groups or departments within your organization. And then you can, it's all about too, I mean, people don't want to be pointed out, if you will. It can be very difficult for people. So you pull together all those perspectives and you send something back out to people and you say, here's what I'm hearing from everybody. Here's the challenges. Here's what people are needing right now. You pull it all back together, and then you have one large virtual meeting as part of the entire organization and say, okay, here's some of the challenges. And here's what's breaking down. How do we work together to identify what are the solutions in moving forward? And that's just, I think, one of the things that I would find important if I'm understanding the correct, the question properly, Katrina.
For sure. Yeah, I think so. And I think that's really good advice is sometimes you have to break it down and get individual perspectives and then bring it all together and use that as the foundation of the teamwork building and coming up with solutions together. I'll move on to Melissa. Do you have any thoughts?
I just want to echo what Joyce said in her presentation, which is about levity and silliness, and I use those a lot. And so, you know, one of the things I appreciate is humor and, you know, just being open and honest. So trying to connect through that. So, you know, can we add some levity? Can we play like a silly game? Like, you know, Joyce, you got a lot of comments in here when you said, what's your favorite candy? You know, so it's that type of thing. So finding those little moments and then definitely connecting, and you need to be intentional, because before what would happen is you'd walk down the hall, maybe fill up your cup of tea and run into someone, have a conversation. Those are not happening. Those are sort of those collisions. They're not like physical collisions, but you know what I mean? They were unintentional, and it was kind of nice to talk to people. You now have to be intentional because we're working virtually. So, you know, set yourself on a daily basis. You should be checking in with someone, and someone hopefully is checking in with you and just saying, how's your day? And so be more intentional. I think during a virtual, like what we're doing now, we need to be more intentional. So rather like try to recreate those like water cooler moments. It doesn't feel as organic perhaps, but they need to be done because that's what holds us all together. That's the fabric. That's like the thin red line that no one sort of like noticed until it was gone. So be intentional and add some levity if it's appropriate. I mean, I always make it appropriate.
Definitely setting the tone, you can do that. And I've seen some tips and tricks from other organizations where sometimes you'll schedule an hour meeting, but the first 10 minutes will allow for that levity, or the last 10 minutes will say, okay, let's take a step back from work and let's talk about something that's fun, that's unrelated to keep us all connected. For sure. Kevin, do you have any ideas?
Well, I'll preempt COVID if I can. The group that I now lead, we were dealing with a connection issue prior to COVID. We were blessed with a number of staff that were moved into offices as a sort of an older way for recognition of seniority and with the company. And across the board, that's often once you get to a certain point in your career, you're given a private office. Unfortunately, that really isolated a lot of people between having closed doors intentionally or unintentionally. Maybe you just didn't open the door after that last phone call, and then it's closed all day. Otherwise, we had field staff that would be out, and you might not see anybody for many days. So one thing that we did was we had a new office space come available, and we're transitioning into that, and everybody's going to be out of offices. So we're in a collaborative work area. And then I did get a couple of questions. So Kevin, now you're going to be moving into an office now that you manage 11 people. And I said, nope, I'm down there with everybody else. We're going to be working together. So hopefully that once we're back to the office, some of that separation is avoided. But as far as the during COVID, we've established corporately, we've set up branches. Everybody gets along really well within branches. So we have scheduled coffee breaks, Tuesday mornings at 10 o'clock, Thursday afternoons at 3. So it's drop in or not. Sometimes people turn on the camera and sometimes they don't. Sometimes people say something, sometimes they don't. We also have the team's bulletin board. People post silly pictures and memes and all sorts of funny things like that. As far as the group, my team, I'm working with one of my peers who deals with the land development team. We haven't found the magic bullet for meeting as a team. I mean, I've tried prior to a long weekend, like nobody's going anywhere on a long weekend. So hey, you know what? Here it is, Friday afternoon at 3. Can I say this? Crack a beer. And there was very poor turnout. And I think any after hours stuff, the idea is there's potentially, I'm going to stick with my work stuff during the confines of the work day, but I have so little time for myself, whether it's dealing with kids, pets, other stressful things, parents. that my time's sacred to me, and I don't necessarily see that connection with my peers at work being a source of wanting to do that. So again, we haven't found that magic bullet. I think brown bag lunches is probably something that we've done recently that has been pretty good. You just drop in. You're going to keep it short to 15, 30 minutes, and then drop in, drop out as you need to.
Thank you. And I think having that flexibility, because not every option is going to work for everybody. So having it where it is voluntary, or you can schedule something, but if no one comes, then that's okay. You know, just being able to tailor to everybody's different needs. Joyce, do you have any advice on this particular question?
Sure, I would add that if you feel like your team is sort of drifting apart during COVID, I think my first piece of advice is to, once you start noticing early signs of that happening, address it right away. Because if you leave it to sort of fester and grow, like negative attitudes can become contagious in a team. So yeah, my first piece of advice is to address it sooner than later. The other thing that I would add is that usually when a team is drifting apart, it's not usually the entire team. It's not sparked by everyone feeling like this and drifting away together. I usually find that it's sort of can be pinpointed to like maybe one or two individuals that are sort of seeding this kind of feeling or drifting apartness. So I definitely agree with what Gail said in terms of reaching out to find out what's happening here, because it could be nothing to do with the team itself. Unless you talk to someone, you don't know what their side of the story is. So you don't want to make assumptions. You want to reach out and find out what's going on and how they're doing and get clarity there.
For sure, that's great. And sometimes dealing with those challenges right up front can be difficult, but being intentional and making that time, as Melissa was talking to earlier, comes into play as well. All right, so we have a question that was targeted towards you, Joyce, so I'll start with your feedback. What advice do you have for trying to build relationships with people in your organization in leadership roles, but are not very approachable?
That's a funny question. Well, there is one structured format that Evergreen has implemented called Colleague, and I'll type it in here because it's a play on words, where every Wednesday from 4 to 5, if you sign up for the Colleague program, you get assigned one person to call to talk for 50 minutes, and then another person gets assigned to call you for another 15 minutes, where you can sort of meet random people in the organization who you might not work with. So that's sort of a random opportunity to meet other people. But I think when you have people who are in executive positions that don't seem approachable, it might not actually be that they're not approachable. Sometimes when people are stressed and they're busy, sometimes they might give the impression that they're not approachable when in fact they are. So I would actually say it never hurts to just reach out and say, hey, are you free? Like, can we have a chat? I'd like to get to know you more. Just like the way that you would reach out for someone for an informational interview. So I would say that it never hurts when you reach out to someone and ask them for something, like, I want to know you better. Can you provide me with support? Can you help me? Usually people don't say no. And this is my experience too. When I blatantly ask people to be my mentors, I've never gotten a no, because people want to genuinely help. So I would say that maybe people who you think are not approachable, maybe they actually can be in the end if you try.
Great, thank you. I'll open that question up to other panelists if you want to speak up. Melissa?
Yeah, I just want to build on what you said, Joyce. So I think it was Benjamin Franklin who was really big on asking people for favors as a way to sort of get into their good graces. And it's completely backwards. You sort of think like, well, shouldn't I do them a favor? But he would often sort of like how he was building relationships is he'd find people who were into reading and he'd say, can I borrow your book? And it would sort of get started. So, I love that you said, you're asking them for something very specific. So that's a great way. Like, if they have a library in their office and you're like, I really hey, can I borrow that book, or tell me the book that you would recommend, you know, I borrow, that kind of thing. The other piece too was just about, you know, I guess I'd challenge the person who wrote that in, say, what is this about unapproachable? Like, what does that mean to you? You know, and what baggage are you bringing to that? Like, are you thinking they're too smart, they're too whatever? Like, what does it mean? Because challenge yourself on what you think unapproachable means before you sort of decide whether they're truly unapproachable. Because I'm with Joyce. I think most people are. We're bringing something to it. We're making assumptions. We're thinking, oh, they're just so powerful or whatever it might be that I can't possibly go talk to them. So challenge yourself on that unapproachable piece first.
That's great. And what I always remind myself is that we all are human. And so sometimes we have great days and sometimes we have not so great days. And personally, you can tell when my facial expression changes. So, you know, that's part of it too, that, okay, maybe I need to give, you know, them a break and I can come back and have that conversation another time. Kevin or Gail, did you want to weigh in on this question?
Find a common ground with people is always really important. It doesn't necessarily have to be about work. Maybe your colleague loves their pet or has a cat or a dog, or maybe a family that they want to share some information about. So finding something that's a common ground often leads to more approachability, if you will. But I couldn't agree with Joyce and Melissa more. Great words of wisdom from both of you.
I can add, just from personal experience, we are very fortunate that at Burnside, our upper management is very approachable, very responsive. Not trying to be a corporate shill, I actually do feel this way, that everybody's very approachable, but occasionally you do get those managers that might report to them to be, maybe not approachable or ornery or just protective of some of their work. So I've met with staff that have had that conundrum, and we've been able to go to that senior management person, not to tell on, but just say, hey, we'd like to do some more work with this, this staff person would like to do more work with this other manager. Is there a way to, work with this person, get some insight, share your excitement about the work that this person does that you want to do, and then see if there's some leverage that can happen, because there could be a bit of personality that you can't break through, but if there's this corporate support for that in the upper management, they want to make sure their juniors are happy. So sometimes some leadership is needed from the senior management team.
That's great advice. Thank you. So one of the other questions that may have been answered already privately, but I thought was really good to share, is how do you balance empathy for team members with expectations from upper management? So building upon a little bit what you were just talking about, Kevin. So I may ask you to start that answer first.
So balancing expectations of upper management or with empathy. So again, being that foundation or those roots for those people, understanding that you're here for them to the degree that they need you to be there. There's sometimes some gentle wording during crunch times that a little bit more effort needs to be put in, whether it's a 12-14 hour field day when you're a junior staff. Sometimes you just got to get your lumps for that, and it's important to convey that without saying you have to go through this because I went through this and this is what everybody does. So I think being mindful of your language, but at the same time not being, they call them either helicopter or lawnmower parents, where you're just paving everything nice and gentle. So sharing that, and that helps them gain some responsibility too, knowing that you're supporting, but at the same time they're understanding some of the leadership for themselves and what goes through their minds.
For sure. And I like what you said about sometimes these conversations can be very delicate. And so you have to be cautious of how you're having the conversation while still having, you know, the honesty and empathy to do so. Melissa, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I guess I would recommend a book that's got a little bit of guidance on this. It's Radical Candor. And sorry, I cannot remember the author's last name, Kim something. And she has this really neat sort of quadrant that says, you know, where she feels radical candor fits in versus like the complete opposite of that is ruinously empathetic. And it's sort of like, I don't even, you know, you don't even want to have an honest conversation, you know, a difficult conversation. You're trying to avoid it. And you want to make the person feel so good about themselves that you don't actually get to the root of what you need to get to. And I think there's ways to do that while still holding the space. Thank you so much, Nikisha, for finding that. Hold the space for the person and for yourself. But radical candor is about sort of saying, where are we breaking down here? What's not going well? Where do we, and you need to step up, you know, that type of thing. So yeah, it's not easy. And, you know, when I referred back to my core values about, you know, feeling that that's really important, if your core value is integrity or respect or love, you know, that's one of my core values. You're doing it out of love. You know, you want the person to do well, but in order to do that, you might need to give some feedback and it might not match what either they're doing or they're thinking. So creating that safe space to have that conversation is really important. And it's not a conversation that I love to do, okay? I don't wake up in the morning and go like, let's go with that, you know, uncomfortable situation, but I know in the end it's so beneficial for me, it's beneficial for the other person. So just to build on what you were saying, Kevin, there, hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Joyce, did you have any words you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would add that sometimes when you're able to change the perception of the problem, that helps to alleviate some of the barriers to getting some work done. So if there's a way to reframe the work that needs to get done so that it can meet the expectations of senior managers or the exec, and have it in a way that makes it more manageable or framed in a different way, or if it's broken down into pieces, I think that can also be a way forward as well. If you can be creative with what needs to get done and how it can be delivered. I think sometimes you change the frame and change the game. I think that can help change some of the mindset as well.
So that comes back to the adaptability and flexibility that I think has been a theme throughout today as well. And Gail, I'll turn it over to you if you have any tips to add.
Well, first of all, in relation to empathy, everybody has a story. You know, particularly now, but, you know, throughout life, these are trying times. And everybody usually has something going on, whether you're a parent with a child that you're trying to homeschool, or whether you've had a health issue in your family, a death. So there's usually always a story, and being empathetic is really important in getting to the bottom of that. But in dealing with people that you work with as a leader too, it's really important to set clear expectations. And when I say, you know, clarifying expectations with individuals, I can certainly say there's been lots of times in my career that I thought I was crystal clear on setting expectations, only to find out that the receiver of the message was hearing it completely differently than what I thought I was saying. So making sure those expectations not only are set, but understood as well. And if somebody is struggling, setting those clear expectations are really important, and also reminding them that you want to help them succeed in doing what they're doing. And I don't want to go too far down a deep rabbit hole, but there's times in every leader's life, most likely, where somebody's going to struggle to the point that they're not a great fit for the organization. And sometimes those courageous conversations as a leader have to happen. And they're probably the most troubling for leaders, all the leaders, is to have those really difficult conversations when somebody isn't fitting and they're struggling so much that they can't meet the expectations that are in front of them, and that's a whole different dialogue.
Definitely. And that takes, like you mentioned, courage, which is a really strong skill that you need to work through. And that's where, you know, mentors can help in terms of navigating that kind of conversation. Excellent perspectives. Thank you. So looking at the chat, our top question right now is, what distinguishes leaders in conservation and the environmental field versus other fields or industries? So I'll turn that to Melissa to start us off.
I'm fortunate that I did work in conservation, but I currently work in a municipal setting, but both are public sector. So sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Absolutely. What distinguishes leaders in the conservation and environment field versus other fields or industries?
I think, you know, some of the things that distinguish them is that whole, they have to be so adaptable. You know, there may be fields that are sort of like, I don't know, and take medicine, you know, it's long standing history, maybe it changes a little bit, it doesn't change drastically, versus conservation. There's like, just seems like there's always something going on. It's, you know, currently in turmoil. So it's sort of that adaptability is so important. And that whole, how do you navigate through and sort of get, you know, get people on board with what you're trying to do. And you are so many competing interests. And so you've got to be collaborative and adaptable. And honestly, sometimes it must be just so exhausting when you just want to be like, can we just do this already? So definitely, you know, feel for all of you on this call who sort of have to navigate that. And, you know, one of the things that you also have to navigate is, you know, watersheds don't look at political boundaries, and yet you are stuck within that. You know, the Grand River Conservation Authority is, how many municipalities, like, you know, are all part of that, or portions of them, and you're constantly having to navigate that. So just that agility, adaptability, and collaboration are so key. And so, you know, I just really admire all of you who are navigating that, especially during this difficult time. So kudos to all of you.
Thank you, Melissa. Much appreciated. I'll turn over to Joyce.
I would say unique skills or qualities include patience, persistence, and grit. I think in this conservation sector, you can put so many hours, blood, sweat, and tears towards stewarding a piece of land, conserving land, pushing for stronger policies. And sometimes all that could be undone quickly with a change of leadership or a change of a plan. And so I think it takes a lot of grit to know that the work you put into something can be undone so quickly, but at the same time acknowledging that there are peaks and valleys and cycles to the sector, so that although we might be currently in a valley, that valley will soon turn into a hill, and to know that that time is coming again. So I think it is somewhat of a tiring sector to begin because of that, but it can have enormous rewards, and the people in the sector are really what help to make it that resilient.
Definitely. And the environmental sector, I find, is smaller every time we have this conversation. You meet people in all different parts of the province and the country and globally, just part of that environmental world. And being able to rely on each other and work through this problem solving together is part of what can make us adaptable, to Melissa's point. Kevin, do you have any thoughts from a different industry perspective?
I'm going to say it, there's a better balance in the conservation community. I mean, I was on a call with 18 people regarding an LPAT, or for those of you that don't know, it was a controversial development. So we had, I think we had 4 engineers, 3 planners, 2 development lawyers, and there was 1 other ecologist in addition to myself, and she was female. So in terms of picking up on all the great things that the other folks say, I think the better balance of the genders means a more comfortable and accepting side to our community that encourages more to come in, as opposed to maybe a locker room mentality or an old boys team that may be felt in other professions. That is taking time for leadership for women to come up. I mean, it's coming. There are some great initiatives in other industries that are rising. It's just it's slower. So I'm finding that women in leadership roles in the conservation field is exceeding the other industries I deal with.
That's a good perspective, and just diverse leadership in general is something to aspire to. And Gail, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I've worked in both the private sector and the public sector, and they definitely are different. From the conservation sector right now, I think that you're the first line of defense in the sense that people can't get through with their environmental frustrations at the provincial level or federal level, etc. But they can get a hold of a conservation authority and they're going to express their frustration. And that takes resilience. Those folks not that in other sectors you're not passionate, but I have found that conservation authority sector folks and those in the not-for-profit environmental sector are very, very passionate. They really believe in what they're doing, and it can get very frustrating when repeated obstacles are put in front of you and in front of us. As leaders, I think one of the most important things is that when morale goes down because of these kind of obstacles, it's your job to keep the positivity. They say it's lonely at the top. It's lonely at the top, and that means that even though you're frustrated or concerned or whatever, your staff, your team are looking to you to keep things buoyant, positive, put the positive spin on things, and move forward through all the challenges.
That's great. Thanks, Gail. And I think part of the challenge, and I can speak from the Conservation Authority perspective, is just the uncertainty, and that's within any sector really. But if you don't have control, then sometimes trying to rationalize and see the step forward is difficult, and that's where leaders can help provide that perspective and use that vision that we've all been talking about to provide a clear path. Okay, so one of the other top questions in our chat is, how would you encourage or inspire a leader as a junior staff person in their leadership skills? It's great to see that there were over 50% leaders here, but what about the leaders and managers that aren't attending these types of workshops and trying to improve themselves, etc.? So I'll point to Joyce to start off with this one.
I think for junior leaders, the most important thing you can do is firstly let them know that you think that they are a leader, because they might not be thinking themselves as a leader, but when they hear other people refer to them as leaders, it starts to shift their mind frame into that mindset that they can lead. I think the second thing is to provide them that platform to showcase their leadership abilities. So if there's an opportunity to make a presentation, or if there's an opportunity for you to make a presentation, maybe they can make it instead. So really giving them that platform to shine so that others can see what you see in this individual.
That's great, thank you. Kevin?
Yeah, Joyce nailed it with, and then going back to what I was saying, people sometimes get into leadership roles organically, and they don't realize that just because people are asking them questions and maybe doing some work for them, that they're in fact showing leadership at that, and maybe they've got to flip their script and realize that there's some eyes on them and some expectations and some guidance. So as Joyce was saying, you know, let them know that they're in that role. And then in terms of, you know, when I've encountered people that could be providing me some more leadership and having that uncomfortable conversation, is spotlighting some of the things that you've appreciated So I really appreciated your guidance on that, and using injecting some of those terms of leadership that they maybe don't realize they're giving, and I think that's a indirect way of identifying that you're depending on their leadership.
Great, thank you. Gail?
Yeah, thanks, Katrina. There's something I want to say to the junior leaders on the webinar today, and that is, I'm sure a number of you may be discouraged about what's been going on in the province, if you will, over the last little while. But I want to tell you, like, this gray hair it came very honestly. For those of us that are on the phone that are a little bit older, we've been going through this for 50, 60 years. Every 10 years, there's a review of the Conservation Authorities Act, and over and over we go. We're resilient. We are resilient, whether you're in the not-for-profit or conservation authorities. Resiliency is really important. And in terms of our junior leaders, I think, again, the best advice is circling back to what this panel said, what was important for us in our first 5 years: mentorship and continuous learning, but mentorship. And I find that with sometimes with the younger people, they're a little hesitant to reach out to those folks that are more experienced, because they're, you know, it can be, well, that person doesn't want to talk to me, or they're too important to talk to me. That's not the case. And please reach out. Please establish your mentors. Have it to be a continuous dialogue with the mentors. And I think that's a really important thing for our junior leaders to know.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gail. Melissa, do you have any other thoughts?
Sure. When I read the question and heard it, I interpreted it as, how do I manage up? So I don't know if I've misunderstood. And that is a tricky spot to be in. So if you're sort of saying, I want my manager to take leadership courses and improve their leadership, recognize that there's only so much you're going to be able to do. And you need to make a decision if, like, they're truly terrible at leadership or that's not a fit for you. It's very hard to change other people. You can only change yourself, right? So if I've understood it properly, which maybe I haven't, you know, there are little things you can do. I think you've heard some tips here about saying, oh, I was really inspired by your leadership. Hopefully it's coming from an authentic place, by the way. It's always helpful to be authentic. Find those things, but also recognize that they may never take leadership courses. Maybe they don't see themselves as leaders. Maybe they're like, I got this, check, check, check. You know, it's hard to change other people. So recognize when you can't. You know that, what is it, the serenity prayer? You know, look at that and say, like, what can I change here? And what do I just need to accept? And what do I say, no, I'm not accepting this. I'm moving on and leaving. So.
And that's a difficult conversation to have with yourself. And a lot of the conversations that we've been having this morning, something that I have found helpful is reflecting, taking a minute to really think it through. You know, we've spoken to our own personal goals and purpose and how that aligns with who we're working with. But even all of the advice today, I know that I'm going to be taking a step back to say, okay, what do I do well? What do I not do well? How can I start to improve that? And that's an important part, I think, of just learning day to day and continued growth. Okay, so we're coming close to the end. We've heard a lot of really good feedback, a lot of inspiration, and I hope that those on the call feel that they can take something away that's meaningful. But I wanted to pose a question out to all of our panelists, that hearing all of the different perspectives and advice and themes of today, if there was one thing that anyone in this call should take away, what would it be in your opinion? So I'll start off with Kevin.
Everybody's been coming up with these great quotes, and the only one I know is Chuck D from Public Enemy. He said, if you can't change the people around you, change the people around you. So the idea is, if you don't like where you are, do something about it. In the private sector, where I am at Burnside, there's next to zero barrier. If you want to make a sideways movement, again, it's a spectrum. It's a gradual shift, but you can move from one sector to another if it's a good fit, if you've got the training for that, and you will be encouraged to do that and mentored through that. So, you know, if people maybe I've had some people transition into my group, and I've had some people transition out of my group, and there'll be different reasons for that. So again, you know, change the people around you if you can't change the people around you.
For sure. Melissa?
That's a great quote, Kevin. Thanks so much. I would say, you know what, one of the things that I'm reflecting on, here's my high-tech cue card, growth mindset. You know, what I've recognized is my fellow panelists, you're all exhibiting that. Gail, I'm so inspired by you. You're continuously growing and learning. And that's what I hope is the takeaway, is none of us are perfect. And we're still working at it, and you know, we're being intentional, we're reflecting and saying, what do I want to work on next? What's the next tough thing I'm going to tackle? So that, I think, is a takeaway. Wherever you're at, keep growing, keep working on it. It's totally feasible, and never be done. Journey, not destination.
Definitely. And bite-sized pieces. 1% improvement or progress is still progress. Gail?
I've had such a great privilege of working with some incredible people over the years. And I think the one thing that I would just mention at this point is trust your team. It's an amazing group of people, and by working together, we can meet any challenge that is in front of us. So, and I too, I just wanted to say on a very quick aside, am inspired by my fellow panelists today and the great questions that have been asked throughout the webinar. And it's just been a very great privilege, Katrina, to participate.
I'm glad, and thank you. I would just add to that also trust yourself. Your gut can tell you a lot of things. And Joyce, any last thoughts?
Yes, I would say to be generous. So be generous with what you know, with your skills and your experience, to the people that you're working with, and also to the people that maybe you're reporting to. So I see it as sort of like it's not just unidirectional. So yeah, be generous with your skill sets and your leadership, and also let people know that you see leadership in others, whether they're your teammates, whether they're people you supervise, or whether they're people that you report to. So to create that leadership awareness among others.
Excellent, thank you. So I think we'll call it there for our panel discussion. And I just want to say again, a huge thank you to all of our panelists for taking the time and providing some insight and inspiration to all of those on the call and those who will be watching this later. It's a very challenging time. And so being able to be honest and open and have this authentic conversation to inspire others has been really meaningful. So thank you very much for your continued leadership in the field of conservation. I also want to say thank you to the participants for your really great questions and your willingness to spend this morning with us. It is our hope, as I've mentioned, that today's presentations, conversations, and examples and stories have brought in some takeaway to you so that you can work forward in your leadership skills as well. This webinar has been brought to you by the Latornell Symposium Steering Committee. I would like to thank all those who helped me and the committee put this together, including Jamie Judry, our Symposium Program Chair, Andrew Krett from Credit Valley Conservation, Bill Trenuth from ACOM, Nisha Mohammed from Conservation Ontario, and Mario and Karen from All Set Inc., who are all part of planning this great webinar today. If you missed any of our first 4 webinars, you can view the recordings at latornell.ca, and the recording for this webinar will be posted in a few days. And now I'll turn it over to Jamie Judry, our Symposium Program Chair, for some final remarks on the success of the Latornell Leadership Program. So take it away, Jamie.
Thank you, Katrina. That was really fantastic panel session. I think it was a great way to end the Latornell Leadership Project in this iteration. And thank you so much to the speakers for myself, and the rest of the Latornell committee. I've learned so much that I can take away personally as I'm developing in my career about what it takes to be a good leader. And so many of the things that I've been thinking about independently were echoed here, and that's really valuable. We embarked on the Leadership Project last summer when we were looking for a way to maintain connection with our network in the absence of our conservation symposium in 2020. And I think we've been able to maintain that sense of connection and community through this series of webinars. We've reached over 1,000 people live during these webinars, and we're seeing almost as many views of our recorded sessions. So we've heard from many of you that more sessions would be welcome, and we're looking now to see what we can do, what we can offer going forward this year. So I encourage you to stay tuned, make sure you subscribe to our newsletter so that you are in the loop. And thank you again to all of the planning committees and all the speakers for making this series such a success. And we just have a little bit of an exit polls for you. If you do have feedback on our webinar series, please take a minute to complete those poll questions, and stay safe, everyone. Thank you so much.